Hi, everyone. I'm so glad you've joined us. I think this panel is going to be fun because we're going to stop talking about the big issues, although big issues are involved, and start talking about individuals and their contributions. One of the things we wrote about earlier this year, at the very beginning of the year, was climate quitters. These are people who joined the quiet quitting movement but did it for climate reasons. Since then, the labor market has gotten to be a little less friendly. So I wonder, both of you who work in companies that are very involved with people who care about climate, have you seen, are there still climate quitters out there in your experience? Serene, do you want to just sort of start?
Sure, I'd love to. So, hi everyone, great to be here today. I work for Carbon Direct, and we are an organization that helps other organizations set and equitably deliver on their climate commitments. So what that means is we have folks ranging from academia to tech to finance backgrounds. And if you take a step back from all the layoffs, right, the unemployment percent is actually 3.5% right now. And there was a report yesterday that there were 142,000 jobs added in clean energy just in the past 6 months. So I think the labor market is not as scary as some of the news may sound. And certainly for our roles, we see hundreds of applicants, especially for areas where there are transferable skills like sales, marketing, brand, and also even for the roles in our team that are more technical, forest carbon, soil carbon, we still get a ton of applicants. So yeah, climate quitting is definitely still a thing, and so is climate switching, folks changing within the industry because they want to experience something new.
Lee, too, you're still seeing a lot of interest in this area?
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, I'm Lee Hoffman. I'm one of the co-founders of the company Runwise. If you live in a building in New York or Boston or DC or Chicago, there's a good chance our technology is in that building. We run all of the energy systems, from heating to cooling to water, and we typically reduce the energy usage and carbon profile of that building by about 20 to 25%. So it's a pretty major transformation. And to do that, you need a lot of people. You need engineers, software engineers who are writing code, building technology, but you also, more importantly, need people on the ground, people installing physical controls with electrical background, plumbing background. So when we talk about, are there still jobs in this industry, to me, it's a little funny because it's a little bit like going back to 1975 and looking at today and being like, are there jobs in the technology industry, right? Like, it would be laughable to ask that today because obviously most of the economy is being transformed by technology. 50 years ago, that didn't exist at all. And at the very beginning, you might have asked, well, how many jobs are going to be created here? And I think we're going to see something very similar in climate. We're just at the beginning of a fundamental transformation in how we run society. And that will touch every aspect of not only society, but of business, of culture, across the board. And so to do that, you're going to need a huge transformation of the job base for people, not just at the traditional skilled labor, but at the trade level, to really be able to make that change. And I think when we look back in 10 or 20 years, we'll have a similar realization that we did with technology, where it's like, of course, a huge sector of the economy and a huge base of the employer base is now in the climate area.
But that said, do we have the right set of skills? It seems like there are a lot of people who want climate jobs, but maybe an English degree is not as helpful as knowing how to be an electrician. I mean, are you seeing that the skills match the jobs you actually need? Are you able to employ people of a variety of skills?
Absolutely. At Carbon Direct, we're really proud of the diversity of backgrounds of our team. So we have folks who have moved from academia, from government, from big tech, from startups, all to work at Carbon Direct. And I think that the intersection of those skills is actually what's really powerful. Earlier today, there were a lot of talks about the systemic nature of the change, right? That this is going to touch every part of the economy, every part of the world, every company out there if they're not already. And so actually, we need all of those skills. We have a lot of those skills. And when those intersections come together, I think, like Lee was saying, there are opportunities that we might not even know of right now. Like Carbon Direct, we just recently posted a role that was called the Environmental Justice and Climate Justice Strategist role, which is not one you would commonly expect at a climate tech company. That role got over 400 applicants within 48 hours, right? And that's a role that you wouldn't necessarily expect to see in climate tech, but actually we fundamentally believe that we need to center equity and justice in the work that we're doing. And so, yes, we have and need all of those skills, and actually the intersection of them, I think, is going to be really powerful.
I think the number one barrier to hitting climate goals is none of the things that most people talk about. It's not capital, it's not attention. It is purely a lack of skilled labor in the key areas, and specifically in those trade labor areas. If you look at carbon emissions in the country, something like 40% of the carbon emissions comes from how buildings operate. You physically cannot transform buildings without having skilled labor that can go into those buildings, install updated systems, install new controls. These are gigantic, massive projects on a 12, 15, 20 million building scale. And what you're seeing there is the same in automotive, everywhere else, and we're just vastly lacking the number and qualified capability of people to be able to do those jobs. And I think it's a major challenge. What I'm excited about is that there are a lot of companies and technologies and programs that are springing up to help address this imbalance, but it is by far the number one thing that's limiting our ability to hit our climate goals.
Yeah, so let's dig a little bit deeper into that, because we've seen that as well in our own reporting. And I wonder whether you feel like, you said there are some ways that we're changing that, but do you feel like the government money is also, we talked about the IRA and how that's changing things. Do you see a path forward in which we can train a young generation to be able to fill those jobs as they are needed, or an older generation?
I think so, but I think what the IRA does, and I want to make it a bigger umbrella, because the IRA is the thing that gets the attention on the federal headlines, but really the thing that's moving the needle are the local laws, like Local Law 97 in New York City is putting carbon caps on every building in the city. There are a fleet of these types of regulations that are forming across the country, and those are really driving, I think, most of the climate change and the movement towards climate beyond economics. And I think ultimately, like, what's happening is those are sort of like the accelerant. The fire's already lit, it's already burning, it's gonna take over the house eventually, but this is throwing lighter fluid on it, and it's really pushing people faster with more capital towards it. And I think ultimately what that does is it doesn't necessarily help us bridge the gap with government programs, but it creates more attention, more money in those sectors that then let companies create training programs and create incentive by creating more jobs for people to actually go and learn the skills they need to learn.
And just to add on talent and succession planning, there was a report from the World Economic Forum, I think just yesterday or the day before, saying how one of the challenges, and there are oil and gas companies that said their biggest challenge was going to be talent and leadership, because the industries are changing so fast, they're so complex, and actually, if you don't have leaders who understand that complexity, who have knowledge, technical knowledge, discipline knowledge, as well as people knowledge, how to lead at scale, you're not going to have that transformational change. So, when I look back at college, because I was speaking at university recently, my job, I didn't know it existed. And it didn't exist because the company that I work for did not exist back then, right? And so how do we inspire young people? How do we inspire folks who are in organizations right now that they may be employees of companies that they don't feel like are doing enough about climate? Start somewhere, right? It's yes, come to climate, work in climate, but also there are climate switchers, and you can be that change in your own organization. I think that's really what's going to drive a lot of the transformation as well.
So let's talk a little bit about the people that you see. Are you just seeing young people, or are you seeing people of all ages? I mean, tell me about the people who most surprise you, who are coming in and want climate opportunities.
I mean, we have 100 and something employees, and range demographics, vary pretty significantly. And we've seen people who are, even in the trade skills, have been doing electrical work on old school electrical systems for 40 years at like gigantic company X. And now they see an opportunity to not only make twice as much money, but be able to actually have a huge impact on building carbon emissions directly, because they're going to buildings and they're putting in controls that day will literally lower the carbon profile of that building 25, 30%. And so we see that all the time. I don't think it's just young people. I think, like any other major wave that changes the way the economy functions, you're going to have everybody who is in that economy be impacted, and you're going to see a broad swath of those skills and individuals move into that sector.
Yeah, similar for us. We're really proud. Our workforce includes folks who are straight out of school almost, and folks, all 5 generations in the workforce at once in a small company, which is super exciting. But actually, I think what I find, again, the most inspiring about it is that there is that opportunity. You asked for the most surprising applicant. One of our folks, there was a sitting state legislator that applied for one of our roles once that I was expecting to conduct a phone screen with. So to say, there are the climate crisis, for the most part, happened. Very few people made decisions that impacted many, many others. And we need everyone to be part of the solution, because if we're not, and we don't take those underrepresented communities into account, we're actually, I think, going to perpetuate the issues that we're already in.
Yeah. So what about finances? I seem to recall when I got out of school and wanted to get involved in the environment, it was sort of an understanding that there would be a trade. Like if you did something that you felt passionate about, you were going to have to take a 20% clip or something like that. Do you still feel like there is inadequacies or inequalities in that? Are you still going to is there going to be a financial pain for going into climate-related work?
I don't think there has to be. I mean, I also worked in an environmental nonprofit, so yes, there is a financial difference between when you're in a nonprofit and when you're in a for-profit, but certainly when you're in a for-profit environment, I don't think that trade-off is really there anymore. Like when we benchmark our compensation, we are benchmarking against other companies of a similar valuation, not just in climate, it's against any climate or any tech companies of that similar valuation. So I don't think that trade-off is really there anymore, unless you're going to work in nonprofit, in which it still is.
It's still better.
Yeah.
I think the beauty of when you look at especially tech-driven solutions to climate, which I think is where primarily we'll see most of the solutions long-term, there's a very healthy balance, which is if you're building something that really has a transformative positive impact and a good ROI, there's a net benefit to both the people buying and the people making it, right? They're saving more money than they're spending, and therefore they're willing to spend a certain amount, and that creates new jobs, new businesses, et cetera. And the great part of that is you see it throughout the tech sector. Typically, those companies then pay higher than average salaries, right? So people who come to our company, whether you're an engineer, a software engineer, and you work in your office at home, or you have trade skills and you're going into boiler rooms and you're installing a boiler control, you're typically making more than you were somewhere else, because we're creating so much value by installing that technology that really has a meaningful impact on both the economics and the carbon and climate footprint.
So I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to throw it out to the audience, because I think this is the kind of discussion people will have some thoughts on. But when you find yourself competing, are you competing against people who aren't doing for talent? Are you competing for people like inside your industry or outside the industry? I mean, do you find that you have people poaching now from within you, like competitors, or how big is this sector?
I'd say both. The sector is huge and growing. We have been very pleasantly surprised when folks from within climate tech apply to Carbon Direct jobs. I think that's a huge mark for our brand and the work that we're doing, being extremely science-backed. But we also, much of our software team, for example, is based in Seattle. We're actively competing with the Amazons, the Microsofts for that engineering talent because of the geographic location where we are. So bit of both, but I think there's plenty of space for everyone.
There's such a shortage of really talented, skilled labor, both everything from software engineers, again, down to trade skills, I shouldn't say down, even up to trade skills, that I find most of the time we're just competing in general to get people in the door, right? And sometimes it is with other, climate companies, but more often than not, it's just how do we get really awesome, skilled labor in the door, because it's a really hard problem.
Yeah. Meg, did you want to? Yeah.
Sure, I've got a couple here. First one to you, Serene, just a little bit more clarity on what does Carbon Direct do and how are you working with clients to invest in climate action?
Yeah, absolutely. So Carbon Direct, we are a carbon management firm, and we work with companies like Microsoft, Alaska Airlines, Shopify, BlackRock on pretty much any stage of their climate journey. So some companies come to us and they might be very early, want to understand their measurement and their footprint and create a strategy. Other companies, like the ones I listed, might already have some very built out, robust sustainability strategies, and we might provide additional scientific due diligence, et cetera. So we have both a software platform that can help you with the measurement, reductions, reporting, and then we also have bespoke advisory as well.
Great. And to both of you, or whoever wants to answer, what do you see as the impact of local laws being issued to stop or restrain ESG-related developments in certain areas?
I would say, especially in the major cities, you're seeing sort of the reverse more than that specifically. Like in New York City, I gave it as an example. You have Local Law 97. In Boston, there's Berto. Every major, especially big city, is implementing carbon legislation that is by far accelerating the trend. You're literally either putting carbon caps on buildings, you're putting requirements on reducing carbon. These things are having a huge transformative impact at the speed at which people are adopting these technologies, adopting change, and really making progress.
For talent that are looking to switch into sustainability-focused roles, how much room is there to acquire desired skills on the job versus having the transferable skills at the interview stage?
It depends on the role. So, right now we're hiring for a forest carbon scientist. If you do not have deep knowledge and expertise in forest carbon, you are not going to be a great fit for that role, and that's just the facts of it, right? But when we've hired in the past for content marketing or sales or even people and culture, you do not need to come from a climate background to make a huge impact in those types of roles. You have such transferable skills from your depth of expertise and your function that I think it's very, very situational. And actually for us, what we also look for is, can you handle our distributed, remote, startup, changing, ambiguous environment? Because if you can, I think you've got a great shot.
One last one to end on, which feels like a good one. What's one piece of advice you have for people who are looking to transition into climate work?
I used to say learn to code, and now I'd say learn trade skills.
I think for me, I do get asked this quite a lot. I think it's a phenomenal question. I think it's to understand exactly what it is you're trying to get into and why, because there's so much in this space. You've heard from companies ranging from some of the largest multinationals in the world to the two of us here, for Series A companies. There's a ton of opportunity, and everyone, the best thing I see in candidates is when they understand not only why are they applying to Carbon Direct, but why their skills are specifically applicable to our stage of company, our size of company, our maturity, the value that they can add, because that makes for, I think, the most compelling candidates.
Okay. I think that was a terrific place to leave it. So I want to thank you both for being on this panel. Thank you so much.
Leslie.
Thank you.